Hi everyone. I've made this short video to give you some tips for preparing for test 2 based on the results of test 1. I used the analysis I did of your performance on individual questions and the responses that you gave to the homework assignment about reflecting on how you prepared for test 1 and whether you thought you did better or worse than you were anticipating. Let's look first at what some of you said helped you do well or better than you anticipated on test 1. And many of you did mention that you studied, which generally is helpful. And so I was glad to hear that you perceived your efforts in this regard to be helpful. And several of you mentioned during the practice quizzes, which I do want to emphasize. And several of you mentioned having the note card. So if you did not use the note card on test 1, try it for test 2. So that is indeed one of the things that you want to consider doing for the next test if you did not do it for the first one. But it also is a good idea to make sure you do the reading. And I'm going to illustrate this with one of the questions that a lot of you did miss, and one of you did mention, at least one of you mentioned specifically on the homework assignment. I also want to encourage you to do the practice tests more than once, even though you do get your points after one try. There are other questions that you can potentially get if you do it more than once. And the other piece is that at some point you should try to take the practice tests without looking at your notes or reading, because that would be a better gauge of whether or not you have retained the material. Let's look at some of those frequently missed questions on the test. Read through it and think about what you think the correct answer is. You can pause the video. I'm going to now show you what the correct answer is to number 7. Okay, so why was this question difficult? This is an application question. So you had to look at a new example of an application of psychoanalytic theory and decide which of these actions would be most consistent with behavior that is controlled by the ego. So each one of these represents something related to the psychoanalytic conception of the personality. So A would be more superego, conscience. B would be an impulsive action that would be more like the id. So C, which is making a plan and doing something at the end of class, is ego, because the ego is, according to psychoanalytic theory, governed by the reality principle. That actually relates to question number 8. And so now you should know what the correct answer is. This is pretty much a fact question. So it looks like when we were talking about the stages of psychosexual development that some of you missed this part about what principles were governing the different personality characteristics as they develop. Question 17 is a question that was purely out of the reading. And so this is one that you would have had to have covered, understood from one of the assigned readings for this first unit. So let me show you, as you think about what the correct answer is, let me show you where this came from. Here were the reading assignments for the first unit, and we're going to look at this one by Smith because that's where the answer to this question is located. So in the chapter on thinking like a psychological scientist, there is a discussion of different kinds of scientific reasoning, and in particular, induction, which is very commonly used in scientific reasoning. And the definition is given right here, drawing general conclusions from specific observations. So let's go back and look at the question. I hope you now see what the correct answer is, that this is indeed the definition from the reading of inductive reasoning. The last question on the test, number 20, was not the hardest question, but the performance on this question was lower than 50% correct. It is another application question, and it is asking you to apply the concept of operationalization to a new example. So we talked about operationalization in class, and it's also in our reading. And in this example, there are a couple of answers which I think are not good answers. You may have been drawn to alternative A because it seems to be more on target than alternative C. But we always want to go with, if we can, a previously developed and validated measure. And so that's why alternative B is the best answer in this case. I hope that this information will be helpful to you when you are preparing for our second test on October 3rd, next Monday. I want you to stay alert because we may not get through all of the topics that are listed for this unit, and so I will let you know after class on Wednesday, September 28th, exactly which topics will be on test 2. And so that would be important in focusing your study. I hope this has been helpful. And of course, as always, if you have other questions about how to prepare, don't hesitate to ask me.